Today I'm talking all about inserts. We're going to cover inserts, outserts, half-outs, two-piece components, different materials, everything, because this is something that doesn't get talked about very much, and I think that insert and component selection in general is something that's overlooked and has serious impacts on how your arrows are going to perform, particularly when you're putting them to the test on animals. If you come up against a hard bone or you miss and you hit a tree, you want that arrow to last as long as possible. Component selection is a massive part of that. So let's get into it. So forgive me that my math's looking a little rough. I've been doing a lot of work in here lately. What I have here is, for the most part, all the types of inserts, outserts, half-out systems that you're going to come across. Now, I can't possibly include everything. This is just what I pulled from my insert drawer in my toolbox, but this is going to cover most of what's on the market. So your classic insert, what you're seeing on arrows, if you ever bought arrows from Cabela's or wherever, and when you were just getting into this, you would have seen something that looked like this, but it was probably, this color. But what this is a full-length insert which would go all the way into the arrow shaft with the exception of just that little lip at the top. These are great. These work fantastic. They've started to go away from them in recency just because there are other options that may offer some other benefits, but this is like a classic design. This is a brass insert. Typically your stock or standard inserts that come with arrows when you buy them are going to be aluminum, and we'll get into all that. But this is just, your classic insert with a small lip on top like that. The next thing that became a big hit in the archery industry were these half-outs. So what these are is basically this standard insert, but now the lip is much larger at the top. Serves a few purposes. It allows a greater customization of weight, as well as it can accommodate standard threaded broadheads in smaller diameter arrow shafts. So this is an old Easton Axis that I just use for setup and tuning. But this would be like a 5mm shaft, which there used to not be any of this style of insert that just went straight in all the way. You needed this extension that came out of the arrow shaft a bit to accommodate the base of the ferrule of your field pointer broadhead. So that's where these came from, and they're a really good option. If you get one that fits good, you can't even hardly feel that seam, and it's a fantastic option. Again, you're going to come across these in aluminum, brass, stainless steel, and nowadays you see some titanium options as well. But the one thing I want you to notice with this is that there is a significant portion of the insert that is exposed outside the arrow shaft. It's sticking out, and that is a trend I'm going to talk about here. I'll explain why in a little bit, but I want you to pay attention to the inserts that have exposed parts of the component versus ones that are completely hidden. So that one's partly exposed. It's called a half-out. This is another type that is fairly new to the market. I guess they've been using them for a few years. Basically what it is it slides over top of your arrow shaft to a certain point, and you would glue it on like that. And then about half of it is going to be exposed like this. So there is no part of this that goes inside the arrow shaft. These were made specifically to accommodate the micro diameter arrows. This one is for a 4mm, so that's why it's not fitting on here. Now, these can be really good if you get a good material. If you're shooting a stainless or if you're shooting titanium or brass, these can be really good. But because the entire thing is external from the arrow shaft itself, the carbon of the arrow shaft offers zero protection to the insert. So with something like this, when it goes all the way in, a huge part of the strength of the front end of your arrow system is coming from the fact that the carbon is tightly hugging that insert and it's protecting it. If this is going to bend, it has to go through that stiff carbon at the end of your arrow first. If you're shooting this at an animal or a target or whatever, it does not take much to bend that, particularly if this is made of aluminum. So again, like the half-out, there's a portion of each of these that are exposed from the arrow shaft, and that's okay if you pick the right material, but it's something that you need to know. Moving on, this is essentially a version of this type of half-out. Now this is stainless steel, this is aluminum. This is an insert or half-out that I would never ever use. I would never shoot this. It's purely aluminum. Less than half of it goes into your arrow shaft. There's so much exposed beyond the arrow shaft that's not being protected by carbon, and the fact that this is aluminum, it will not take many shots and this will bend. I promise you. I see guys bringing their arrows in all the time with aluminum half outs and they are bent like crazy after only a shooting session or two because aluminum bends. It's just not a good component to use in anything that's external on an arrow. That brings me to the next one, which are these two-piece systems. Now, I really like these. These were my exclusive choice for quite a few years. This is an aluminum post, but what I like about it is it goes so deep into the arrow shaft. It's down to about here, right? There isn't a huge amount of aluminum that is exposed, but it is still a concern. But what you're getting out of the length of that is that you are getting so much structural integrity on the front end of your arrow because there's so much carbon that's hugging that insert super tightly. Now this one doesn't fit quite right, obviously, but if you had one that fit perfectly, it would be a perfectly snug fit all the way in. Now these systems work as a two-piece system. So this would be an aluminum post, and then this is a stainless sleeve that would go over top. And now if I had a 4mm arrow, what this is designed for, I could show you exactly how it fits together. But so basically your aluminum post is going to go that far into the arrow, and this being a stainless sleeve is going to go over about that far. It's going to totally cover any part of the exposed aluminum, and it's going to cover some part of the carbon. So that adds a huge amount of structural integrity to the front end of your arrow as long as this is stainless. If this is aluminum, you run into the exact same issues as before, where you have a massive amount of a very weak metal taking the first point of force on any arrow impact, and it will bend. So if you have something like this, an aluminum post is fine if you have a stainless, a titanium, or a brass sleeve to cover it up. Now, you might ask, why wouldn't you just use all stainless? Well, because stainless is heavy. So the beauty of this system is I can use a really light aluminum post and then a stainless sleeve to customize my weight. I can also use a totally stainless post and a stainless sleeve, and then I'm increasing my total FOC by whatever amount. And there's all sorts of different combinations of materials that you can use to achieve whatever weight you want. But the point being, with this two-piece system, with anything external, if the external piece is aluminum, you're going to run into trouble really early on. Now, I am shooting all aluminum inserts this year, but I'm shooting the hit insert. So this is a hit insert for a 4mm. This is an old Deep 6 insert that I just pulled out of my drawer, but now they're making them for the 5mm axis. So basically, this insert, you'd put some glue on it and you'd put it part within your arrow shaft and you'd seat it into the arrow shaft using this tool, and that aluminum insert goes all the way down to there in your arrow shaft. So there's no issue with this aluminum because there's so much protection that that carbon is offering by tightly hugging the entire aluminum insert. Now you can get these in stainless or brass or titanium options as well. And yes, if your arrow comes across a certain impact that is hard enough, this whole thing can bend inside the arrow shaft, but that's extremely rare. I mean, you got to be shooting, you got to be like John Lusk shooting a concrete block for something like that to happen. So I don't worry about an aluminum insert at all if it's completely contained with my arrow shaft. But again, you have weight customization options with that, in that you can choose an aluminum, you can choose a heavier stainless, or a lighter but strong titanium. There's just so many options. I know there's some more niche new systems out there that I might not have covered here, but in general, this is how inserts work, how inserts go into your arrows, and what the strengths and weaknesses of certain designs, and particularly of certain materials are. It's something that you should not overlook. You will regret it if you build up a $300 dozen set of arrows and you take your first few shots and you pull them out and your tips are starting to bend. And there's nothing you can do about that unless you want to shorten and cut off your arrows and rebuild them. But it can really cost you money, and it can cost you success. If you're hunting elk and you hit a shoulder and all that force is being taken by something as flimsy as an exposed aluminum piece with no carbon protecting it, that is bad news. It's just not going to work. It's going to suck up so much of your arrow's potential energy. It's going to kill your penetration. It's just something you want to stay far away from. Aftermarket components are well worth the money if you Take the time to select the ones you want based on weight, based on your setup. Just pay attention to your material, pay attention to how much is going to be sticking out of that carbon, and you guys will be building better arrows right away.